Sahana bhavatu, sahanau bhunaktu, sahaviryam karvavahai, tejasvinavaditam astuma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy. May our study be illumined. We may not unnecessarily cavil or disagree with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. The usual prayer for teacher and student. A number of outstanding questions have beset human inquiry for millennia. Actually, we can say ever since man started to draw on caves several hundreds of thousands of years ago, knowing that this body at some stage dies, what becomes to the person after death is an outstanding question. Another question, increasingly made difficult as human experience and life advances, is why are people born unequal? We have a saying that everybody, all humans are equal, and yet our observation is something very different. We see that people's circumstance is very different in different regions of the world. Countries in Africa and Somalia, Ethiopia, various places now undergoing war and conflict. Some countries undergoing disease. Some children are born into abundance and richness and wealth. Others are born poor and deprived. Is it their fault? Jesus was asked this very question. Somebody who was blind from birth. Is it his fault or is it the fault of the parents? And if the person is blind from birth, it presupposes that if it is his fault, then the fault is from a previous birth, something before this current birth. However, if it's the fault of the parents, something like a moral genetic inheritance is proposed. The sin coming down onto the son or the child. Because don't forget, blind from birth. Very swiftly, Jesus dispels both sides of this argument, and he says, he's blind in order to manifest the greater glory of God, words to this effect, to show the fullness of divinity. And because Jesus had a different way of looking at things, different wiring within him, his outlook made the blind man see. Just a little bit of ritual. Here, come on. Take some clay with a little unhygienically, mix it with a little spittle, put it on your eyes, go and wash it off in the water. Your faith has saved you. Very key statement. Indicating that what we think comes to pass. It depends on the strength of our thought. The Vedanta philosophy proposes that at the very root of a person, at the root of everybody's existence, is some entity that never changes. A simple process of introspection will establish this. And when we come to this entity that doesn't change, that is never born, that never dies, that is eternal, then we realize that the question of what happens to the individual after death, from this point of view, becomes irrelevant. There is no death. The whole of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita is orientated around the second chapter, where Arjuna is considering this question of birth, life, and death, and the horrors that he is about to encounter, and the mental frame which is despondent. And the whole of Krishna's message to him is, my dear fellow, you cannot be wounded, you cannot kill, you cannot be killed. Echoing, of course, passages from the Katha Upanishad. You cannot be slain, you cannot slay, because your intrinsic nature is this pure self. The difficulty with this, of course, is it takes a lot of persuasion, because our so-called normal experience doesn't tally with this. Our normal experience is as a world of relationships where the individual becomes paramount. And the individual then has to set himself or herself up against external odds. And one of the easy answers to this question, what happens after death, is some external factor made the arrangement of birth, life, and death. And that same external factor is responsible for the inequality. So some theologies will say it is only divine will. God's will made it like that. That stops any further inquiry. You can't ask why, it simply stops there. God's will is God's will, finished. But the other theologies may say it's a very difficult question, this question of suffering in the world. Why would a loving God make a world of suffering, of pain and difficulties? And it is only the Oriental mind that seeks to solve these problems by a simple term called karma, and introduces an ancillary notion of rebirth. But rebirth of what? Clearly not rebirth of the fundamental self. We've already established that was never born. It doesn't die. The question of incarnation or reincarnation doesn't occur at that point. But when we deal with our so-called normal experience, our individuality, our world of reactions and behaviors, then this is what is technically called a jiva. This jivahood. What is this jivahood? There are many sheaths that comprise the totality of an individuality. Not just one. We look at the physical and endorse it, that's our reality. And then we may look at a psychophysical field and say that's our reality. Principally, it's physical, based on physical. If you think of somebody, you'll think of the physical element of them. But when you investigate through introspection, you'll see that there are various layers. Taittiriya Upanishad proposes at least 5 layers. Physical layer, called the body, made from food. Yesterday's pasta and bread, say, or bananas and milk, whatever it is. It comes out as this body. And then the next layer will be something much more subtle. There'll be a whole area of energy. We find that there is an energetic or subtle element there that provides life, and when it goes, we say that that life element has been withdrawn from the body. There's a passage in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad which very clearly describes the exit of life from the human body. Anybody who has observed this will see how certain areas get cold. And then it goes on and on and on, gradually, bit by bit, so that gradually every sheath seems to be removed until life exits. The eyes start shining. You can say life can exit through the eyes, or it could exit through the top of the head. Certain parts of the body, we can see, because life seems to have gone from here, it's gone to there, and eventually gone completely. And then we pronounce the person is dead. Some life force has gone. And then within that, we can say there is something called a mind. And this is all arranged in terms of a duality. What is perceived and the perceiver. And then ultimately the intellect is there, a choosing, deciding, determining faculty is there. And an area of profound bliss experienced in deep sleep. These 5 levels or 5 layers or 5 sheaths, these are described in the Taittiriya Upanishad. So we come to a conclusion that sum totality, when the body is gone, must continue. And this is the unique philosophical contribution of Eastern thought to these critical questions. So what is this term karma? Well, the first chapter in an assemblage of talks, assembled called Karma Yoga, Swami Vivekananda describes it all so beautifully. I'll quote from him. The word karma is derived from the Sanskrit kr, to do. All action is karma. Technically, this word also means the effects of actions. In connection with metaphysics, it sometimes means the effects of which our past actions were the causes. But in karma yoga, we have simply to do with the word karma as meaning work. Why does he mention this process, this approach, karma yoga? Because the next thing he says is, the goal of man is knowledge. This life is full of activities, actions, internal and external. And that is the one great ideal, he says, placed before us by Eastern philosophy. Not pleasure, but knowledge. This is the goal of man. Pleasure and happiness come to an end. It is a mistake to suppose that pleasure is the goal. The cause of all the miseries we have in the world is that men foolishly think pleasure to be the ideal to strive for. This then brings a question to us, because we understand, even in Swami Vivekananda's day, that Darwin had announced this idea of origin of the species, descent by modification, what we today call evolution, a series of changes. Logically, we can see there must be some direction in it. And if this goal is true, the direction would be this perfection, not all the pleasure on the way. And yet the biological diagnosis is we are, as biological creatures, destined to seek pleasure. It's described in different ways. It's described as struggle for survival. It's described as the propagation of the species is the most successful in the evolutionary process. But then if we examine the lives of Buddha, Jesus, and others, we find they would be evolutionary failures, because none of them had any use for the propagation of the species. None of them had any use for surviving by emphasizing the maintenance of the body through eating, drinking. It was the exact opposite. Their principle was a principle of renunciation. Renunciation means all the fruits of one's activities, all the rewards, all the gains that are there. We have no interest in it because they are future orientated, and these all create, at least at minimum, sense of anxiety and disturbance of the mind. And when we discover a peaceful aspect, we can then see with greater clarity what is the reality, what is the truth, what is this perfection that we're talking about. And so, if we take this karma in a sense that it has not popularly been taken, because popular culture will talk about karma in a fatalistic way. People say, oh, it's your karma. It means you can't do anything about it. A kind of Calvinistic approach that says there's a predeterminism. Don't worry about it. It's already set in stone. It's set in the stars. This kind of thing. But the principle of karma is quite different from that. And all that karma means really is a set of events that are determined by our own choice. We can lift ourselves up or drag ourselves down by our own intentions and thoughts and actions, by our own choices. This is far from fatalism, far from simple predeterminism. Not at all. We are the authors and determinants of our own faith, of our own fate, of our own future. That is quite clear. So the whole principle of this sowing and reaping, of this causal aspect to life, which operates as a law, is in response to problems. It solves a number of problems. How can somebody act in such a way and get away with it? Let us take, for example, how history is replete with demonic figures, if you will, figures that have slaughtered millions and thousands. People often quote in the Second World War, Hitler and so on. They say, how did he get away with it? Some theologians say, well, there's no question that his residence, his post-mortem residence, will be hell. And who put him there? And who will reward you if you do some good? In some religious texts, such as the Quran, there are various post-mortem conditions mentioned, or certainly inferred, and then elaborated on by various commentaries called hadiths. So that when we see these, it is clear, if you do good, you'll get good. If you do bad, you'll get bad. And this is the same principle in karma, except it doesn't go on eternally. You make a mistake in this life, is it really fair to get a reward or punishment which is eternal? So, along with this is a suggestion of rebirth. There are Christians who have a phrase that you need to be born again, and people of an Oriental bent, such as Hindus, will say, don't worry, we certainly believe that we will be born again, and that we are born again. So, but it's not that kind of thing, you see. There was one man who died. He led a very decidedly evil life. And so in the post-mortem condition and the post-mortem imaginary scenario, he went to hell, and they allocated him a seat. And on that seat, they put a beautiful maiden on his knee. And after a while, he wondered, am I in heaven or hell? They said, no, you're in hell. I said, but why is this? He says, don't worry, it's not your punishment, it's her punishment. We have these fanciful ideas of this post-mortem condition, but this principle of karma and rebirth put things in a much better perspective. Let us quote from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad that deals with this issue so beautifully. I'm quoting from the 4th section of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, 4th chapter, and there are stanzas that range from 2 to 6. Just for your interest, the amount of observation which is there is extremely interesting. It starts off with a question: when the self, by the self meaning the psychophysical self, gets to weakness, gets to confusedness, as it were, then the breaths gather round him. He takes to himself those particles of light and descends into the heart. And when the person in the eye turns away, then he becomes non-knowing of forms. And then people say he's becoming one. He does not see, they say. He's becoming one. He does not smell, they say. He's becoming one. And so it goes on. And then a beautiful description. Just as a leech or a caterpillar, for example, when it has come to the end of a blade of grass, after having made another approach to another blade, draws itself together toward it, so does this self. By self we mean everything except the body, what we can call the soul. So this self, after having thrown away the body and dispelled ignorance, not thrown away anything else, only the physical body, after having another approach to another body, draw itself together for making the transition to another body. This is a clear indication of the principle of rebirth contained in the Upanishads. So this is one of the great pillars of the Upanishads, this principle of both karma and also of rebirth. But we have to be very clear, it's not the rebirth of the fundamental self. It is the rebirth of all the accumulated experience. And we can say this accumulated experience is learned behavior. But what we mean by learned behavior is really discovered behavior. Now we have a very different view of the whole series of changes that we call evolution, an unfolding of what is already there. This gives us great hope, great optimism, so that whatever action you do, you will reap, not necessarily only in this life, but also in a post-mortem beyond the body, making death a mere comma, not a full stop. This approach toward death, then, says, is like a journey. The fact that the instrument of the body is gone doesn't mean to say we can stop our journey. It means we continue. And we need all the different equipment to continue. And so the effects of all our actions will have its result, will have its telling effect on the body and the mind. A continuing series of advances, designed, if you will, by nature herself. This is why, according to this theory, this is why people are born unequal. It is not that there is an external interfering entity that is unjust and unloving and temperamentally puts you in this condition or that condition. It is your own doing. You are your own author of your destiny. There is no external force against you. Anything comes from within. Everything comes from within. And so what becomes to the individual after death, we continue the journey, a pilgrim journey to find this destination of perfection and freedom. Then why are people not equal? It is your own doing. Don't blame another person. Don't blame circumstances. Don't put if and but. If only things were different. If only I was born under a lucky star. This fatalism is gone in this system, totally. It's a complete opposite of a contemporary view of what this karma means. And then, is there a moral foundation somewhere? Is there a reward and punishment somewhere? Yes, but not from an erratic God's will. It is from your own deeds. You can elevate yourself or drag yourself down. And again, just to reinforce, it is not applied to what we call the Atman, that central source, that higher self. That is beyond change and birth and death. That has to be emphasized. And this is where Vedanta comes into its shining heights to say, the final conclusion says, this birth, this life, this death is all in the relative world, the world of aparavidya, a lower knowledge, not in terms of higher knowledge. So we have an accumulation on the basis that every action, every thought, every intention has its subtle imprint in the unconscious area that carries forward. This accumulation of behavioral impressions is called samskaras, technically. Let us continue with this Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And even before that, we can see how there is also reference to the Shatapatha Brahmana. It goes like this. Every man, every person is born in the world fashioned by himself. Nothing could be clearer than this. The good and evil are laid down on the scales in the yonder world. And whichever of the two sinks down, that will he follow, whether it be the good or the evil. He who does good will be born as good, says the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad now. And he who does evil will be born as evil. He becomes holy by holy deeds, evil by evil. Therefore, in truth, it's said that man is altogether and throughout composed of one thing, karma, desire. Often you find people not knowing these texts will refer to karma as karma, but karma means desire. And there is a link that the perpetuation of the effects is driven by a desire. And the whole of the evolutionary process, therefore, is driven by a desire. Very often the example is given in the evolutionary theory, hooked in with this metaphysical idea. Supposing there is an animal that decides that no longer wants to compete decides that the lower branches of a tree and the lower leaves are no longer succulent, and other creatures are competing for these, and longingly looks at the leaves on the top of the trees, and through that desire develops within itself the capacity, the instrumentality to reach up, elongate its neck. Now we have something called a new species, giraffe. This is one of the examples. And so, this desire, in proportion to his desire, so is his discretion, what is called kratu. And in proportion to his discretion, or wisdom, or discerning wisdom, so he performs acts karma. And in proportion to his acts, so does it result to him. So Hinduism, for example, and Vedanta is the philosophy of it, and it goes on to Buddhism and other Eastern philosophical schools, will tell us that the good and evil tendencies of this life and a person's happiness and suffering are really the inevitable consequences of the actions of a previous life. You're born with a set of circumstances. There is a reason why two children, identical twins even, born with the same environment, come out differently, different tendencies. Now there are several explanations for some life monad or some basis of behavior. The one will be that intrinsic to man is a soul that is born in a moment and goes on infinitely. But we would dismiss this argument by saying, if it is infinite, it has no beginning. And so you can't inject a soul in one moment and it goes on infinitely the next. This theological point of view, every logical person would need to dismiss. What is the second? The second explanation would be that, all right, maybe the mental frame, the behavioral frame, the fundamental difference, even at an infant level, is genetically derived, just as the physical characteristics of an individual are genetically derived from XY chromosomes. Well, this can be applied certainly physically, but there's no evidence for it to apply on the mental level. And when you analyze through introspection what is the fundamental basis, you come to a mortal self, some datum that acts as a witness, an observer, beyond which you cannot go, and observes all the other fields and layers in front, what we call these sheaths, that operate as fields containing multiplicity, objectivity. Always there's a witness independent from it. So how do you explain this? So you cannot say that it is on the basis of this genetics. The only explanation will be this rebirth, or what we might consider a continuation, what is more kindly called a transmigration. So we see that this conviction also has taught those who believe it to regard the pain of this life not as inflicted from outside, but inflicted by oneself. And they accept it with, therefore, calmness and resignation when they understand this. And of course, it's also an incentive to do the right thing, to do right conduct, to behave in a good way. Because if a person sins no more in this life, then he will be spared grievous suffering in future existence. And the goal of all this endeavor that we call yoga, this practical portion of spiritual life, this endeavor to gain a unity of existence through concentration and concentrated effort, is all there to remove pain is a fundamental basis of the discovery that Buddha had. Seeing all the suffering and all the changes in life going from disease, poverty, death, etc., he determined, is there a way out of this painful existence? What is the cause of it? And he determined the cause of it is desire, constant desire, a sense that I need to be fulfilled constantly from the outside, and then go through a round, incessant round, which we can describe as birth, life, and death, birth, life, and death. You can put the sequence in a funny way. Supposing you say, is there a prerequisite for death? Yes, birth. Then the other way around. What is the prerequisite, therefore, for birth? We can say it's death. You can see it is derived in a circular way rather than a linear way. And the whole pattern of existence and life is cyclical. We can simply see it in the life of a tree. A seed begets a tree, grows into a tree. The tree develops a seed, and the whole process is repeated time and time again. So it goes on. The story, the drama that we call the cosmos, is one of birth, life, and death. Birth, life, and death. Which began, which ended. Swami Vivekananda gives this example of a circle where you have points A and B. Which came first, the A or the B? You can't determine because it's on a circle. So how to get out of this suffering is the practical implication of understanding these principles. Why would we want to save up all our money, take a holiday camp, buy a two-way ticket, return ticket? And so there are some aspects to this. And these are fivefold. Let's discuss what these fivefold aspects are. Firstly, there is the case of the highly developed souls, those who lead a perfect life, almost perfect life, but don't quite reach this pinnacle of perfection. They're nearly there. Great saints, great holy people, great people who have no wish to do any action for themselves. Those who have non-demanding love for the whole of humanity. Those obvious people, known or unknown, who lead the holiest of lives. They go to a world according to these Upanishads. This world is called Brahmaloka, something like a Christian heaven, with no obvious rewards, no sensual rewards about it. And there, they go on from there, and we can understand this Brahmaloka tells the story. It is the loka, the location, the space of a cosmic mind, the personal God, where we stand in glory and enjoy the company of our personal God. And there we go on to our freedom, or there are some cases where those return. Overall, this path is the path of the illumined ones. Devayana, it's called. And then what about people who are basically good? People who follow the principles of religion. People who are philanthropists. They do good to the world. But they still have a desire for the fruits of all their actions. They are still motivated by rewards, but intrinsically morally good people. They will go to what is called Chandra Loka, that is Loka, that location of the moon. These are all just symbolic terms. The moon is a reflection, its light is reflected from the sun. And so this is the lunar path, so-called, as it's allegorically described, is the path of the forefathers, Pitriyana. It is kind of like a holiday camp where you spend all the savings of all your good deeds. You don't engage in any further rewards. You're simply spending your holiday money. At this point, you'll have to be reborn. And so you'll go from these realms, and then you get born again to continue your journey, because it is really only with the human equipment that we can realize the highest. Even the devas, the gods, as it were, will have to be born as man. That makes man higher than the gods and the angels in that sense. And then what about those people who engage in what the Bhagavad Gita calls the threefold gateway to hell? Lust, greed, anger. These are seen to be the threefold gates. People who clearly lead an immoral life. These people, of course, their punishment is self-punishment, and they will go in a different direction. 7 hells are described in this system, as well as 7 heavens, if you will. In other words, many realms. In my Father's house there are many mansions, says Jesus. Well, there are also many realms of what we might call hell. But should we give up? This is the great positive message of the system. After expiating, after paying, as it were, for their evil deeds, they again become born as human beings and continue their journey. You can see that the system is a very fair system. What about the utter vile people, those who are in the depths of depravity? They go and they get reborn after many, many births as the more insignificant species, biological species that we experience, mosquitoes, fleas, and so on. Some people say, what is the use of these buzzing things called mosquitoes? In Africa, they are so severe. Some people say they come searching for you with lamps. Well, of course, there's the fireflies, actually. So these buzzing things, of course, a mosquito net is a device designed to capture the maximum number of mosquitoes possible. So they shouldn't give up hope, because after multiple eons and eons of lives, they too ultimately will be reborn as humans, and they will continue their journey. All of this is comparable to the human experience of the waking, the dream, and the dreamless sleep. These realms of rewards and so on, we see a comparable experience of this in the delightful world of dreams. And we are, in a sense, reborn. In a sense, every night is a dress rehearsal for death. We go into the depths of blankness. And this blankness is very close to the reality, this unity of oneness. But not having changed our life in any way, we get reborn, as it were, in the waking state again and continue our journey. And so there are technically 3 types or 3 categories of this causal relationships, of these effects, if you will. You can compare them to an archer with a bow and arrow shooting at a target, and he has a whole store of quivers on his back. And technically, this is called sanchita karma. That is, all your previous actions, but the growth, they all grow and accumulate in a certain sheath. That is the unconscious mind itself. These impressions, these samskaras, these duplicates, every action having an impression on the unconscious mind, these are stored up and you can't stop them. They will come out. There is another kind of karma called prarabdha karma, and these are part of the sanchita, it's part of the storehouse. The storehouse may come out later, but prarabdha will have to come out in this very life. And so we have to endure it. We have to endure the consequence of our actions in this life, because they begin to fructify in this life itself. They are can't be avoided in this life, but we can endure them. And also in this life, we have the opportunity for the highest goal. There's another category. This category is, as I say, the fifth category that I didn't mention. That is, those who get this freedom in this life itself. They will also have to endure this prarabdha karma, but will have maybe the necessary detachment not to experience the pain of it. The agami kind of karma, that will be what is now for the future. In other words, every second that we experience, we can issue or shoot, as it were, using the analogy of an archer. We can shoot something that will bear fruit in the future. We can determine whether it be good or bad. We can play a game like that and insert something positive in it, being aware that time is a perceived or is a series of perceived moments that arrive in this now. And whatever we put in it, the fruits will appear in the future. This makes so-called salvation a minimum of 51% noble, pure thoughts, actions, and 49% other things. Of course, we can increase it. I'm only talking of a minimum. We should be diligent, therefore, and we should purify the mind and insert values of nobility and strength and truth and goodness and love and harmony, a generosity of spirit, non-demanding love, love of God, love for fellow man. Every religion has the same devotional precepts. Love the Lord your God with all your energy, all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength, your whole being. And love your neighbor as yourself. It's very simple, but of course, difficult to practice. It's all right. Like any sport, it's worth practicing. And so, the arrows that are shot, sanchita, you've shot the arrow already. And new actions are accumulating arrows for more and more and more, all in the unconscious mind. And then there is the prarabdha karma. But the thing that we can control most of all and avoid the pain in the future will be using this present moment and transmuting just ordinary action and thoughts into karma yoga. I always think now of that beautiful phrase that Swami Vivekananda gives in the context of evolution. We'll find it at the very last of the Raja Yoga. In fact, the last of the section of Patanjali Yoga Sutras with his commentary, having dispensed with the 33rd Sutra on Kaivalya, that is isolation, independence. He puts it so beautifully. He puts it in a non-biological way, and I have previously quoted this and read this out before. So beautiful do I consider it. Because all of this arrangement is nature's arrangement. It is designed in our favor. It is designed to give us every opportunity. We are given unlimited opportunities to pass, as it were, life's university exams. And when we fail, the opportunity is there again. It's presented as a blank check in every second, every moment to be filled. And then life after life, unlimited lives. What a wonderful, wonderful arrangement we have. Nature's task is done, he says. This unselfish task, which our sweet nurse, it's not a nature against us. It's not fighting, biting, scratching. It's not our enemy. It's our friend. Sweet nurse, nature, had imposed upon herself, not a cruel joke against you, then imposed on herself, she gently took the self-forgetting soul by the hand. Our mistaken view of life that creates pain, with a motherly attitude, takes us by the hand, come on, this way. Takes us by the hand, as it were, and showed him all the experiences in the universe. All the experiences. From the experience of a bacteria, all through to those cells that decide to work in community. Ultimately, to accumulation, physical accumulation, that we call man's body, with the headquarters of neurological cells, all working in coordination, independently respirating, independently replicating, independently assimilating, independently evacuating. What a wonderful ingenuity contained in this, through all this accumulated discovery called experience that ends in behavior. Showed him all the experiences in the universe, all manifestations, bringing him higher and higher through various bodies, till his lost glory came back. And he remembered his own nature. Then the kind mother went back the same way she came for others, who also have lost their way in the trackless desert of life. And thus is she working without beginning and without end, and thus through pleasure and pain, through good and evil, the infinite river of souls is flowing into the ocean of perfection, of self-realization, and finishes off with a prayer. Glory unto those who have realized their own nature. May their blessings be on us all. All nature's resources are at your disposal. And of course, what this means is that all souls will ultimately attain perfection. Ultimately, it will be so. But it depends on the spiritual evolution. It depends on taking up the thread of spiritual life and taking up that thread in such a way that we do it energetically. Success is speedy for the highly energetic, says Patanjali in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. So these are the 4 courses contained in karma. This is the theory put out. And these are the great answers to these great questions that this system contributes and solves all these various problems and difficulties, answering those 3 questions. What becomes of us after death? Why are people not equal? And what is the moral foundation? Is there a moral foundation? And is it imposed from the outside? Doesn't seem very fair. Or is it from inside? Is it directed from your own behavior? All these samskaras remain, once the body goes, they remain in seed form to manifest on other planes of existence. And so we see this optimism and optimistic hope in all of this. There is another passage which is here, just to conclude this. We have read our lower nature by turning each page, or in other words, by passing through each stage of animal life, from the minutest bioplasm up to the present stage of existence. I'm quoting from a book on rebirth or reincarnation from Swami Vedanta. Now we are studying the pages which deal with moral and spiritual laws. If anyone wants to read any page over again, he will do it. Just as in reading a book, if anybody feels particularly interested in any page or chapter, he will read it over and over again and will not open a new page or a new chapter until it is perfectly satisfied with it. So, similarly, in reading the book of life, if the individual soul likes any particular stage, he will stay there until he is perfectly satisfied with it. After that, he will go forward and study other pages. One may read very slowly, and another may read very fast. But whether we read slowly or rapidly, each one of us is bound to read the whole book of nature and attain to perfection sooner or later. According to the Vedanta, the end and aim of evolution is the attainment of perfection. Physical evolution of animal life reached its perfection in the human form. There cannot be any other form higher than human on this earth under present conditions. It is the perfection of animal form. From this we can infer that the tendency of the law of evolution is to reach perfection. We have to remind ourselves constantly on a day-by-day and day-to-day basis of this fact that we are destined toward none less than perfection. Be ye perfect as your Father in heaven, says Jesus, not as an unattainable goal, as is interpreted by many, but as a realistic discovery of your own true divine nature. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.